Excited to be joined this week by New Hampshire Superior Court Justice William Delker. He sits in the Hillsborough County Superior Court in Northern District of Manchester. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
So you penned an op-ed in the Union Leader that was entitled "Everyone is entitled to equal access to justice." Full disclosure, I worked at the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law for 12 years. I've met you on multiple occasions through my
Yes.
journey over there, and I've had many discussions on the court system and such over the years. And I was especially interested to hear that the New Hampshire Judicial Branch started a diversity inclusion initiative in 2022, and maybe let's start off with what that entailed before we dive into what you covered in your op-ed.
Sure. So Chief Justice McDonald put together a steering committee which comprises judges and clerk staff and staff across the judicial branch to really take a self-examination of how we deliver justice to everyone who comes into the court and comes into contact with the court system. And so over the course of the first year, the steering committee really studied what are we looking at, what do we hope to accomplish, and how are we going to do that. And then in late last year, in December of 2022, we had a meeting at the Manchester Community Center, and we met with a number of community leaders from various constituencies who have interactions with the courts to talk about this initiative, to invite them to provide feedback to us so that we can understand how we serve everyone who interacts with the court, and what we're doing good and where we can improve.
What was kind of the temperature of the room on that conversation?
Oh, I think it was a very, really encouraging meeting. It was well attended. I think we had in excess of 75 people there, and there really was a lot of excitement about this opportunity to have this dialogue, to examine, this is just really the breadth of the type of people that come into contact with courts, whether it be witnesses or litigants, landlord-tenant matters, family court cases, obviously criminal cases, the whole scope of the society that comes into contact with the courts. And, we're really eager to hear that, and they're eager that we're reaching out and proactively looking for that kind of input. And so I think it's going to be a great dialogue that's going to occur.
So what led you to write this op-ed? Is it primarily just to get information out there for people what this initiative entails?
Yeah, so the New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity had a conversation with me about this initiative, that they are interested in what we were doing, and asked a number of questions about how this initiative is taking shape, and what, is the discussion we're having, what goals and what achievements we hope to occur over the next several years. And so that was part of that dialogue, and the result of that dialogue turned into the op-ed at the Union Leader.
So in the third paragraph of it, you reference constitutional mandate with regards to this. Is that the initiative or something else that has to be followed?
Yeah, so this effort really stems from a couple of core principles that we find in the New Hampshire Constitution. Of course, they're also found in the U.S. Constitution, but they're very explicit in New Hampshire Constitution. Part 1, Article 2 of the New Hampshire Constitution states, and I'm paraphrasing, but states in essence that everyone who comes into contact with the court deserves a right to be treated equally, regardless of their race, religion, gender, or national origin, or any other characteristics. And then Part 1, Article 35 of the New Hampshire Constitution explicitly says that in order to deliver justice, citizens have a right to the impartial interpretation of the laws, and therefore judges need to be as impartial as the lot of humanity will allow. And so part of this is a self-examination. Are we truly being impartial? Do we have preconceived ideas about people that we're interacting with that might affect that? And how do we better deliver impartial justice?
Yeah, I mean, and the only way you can really do that is with data. Like I've had many conversations with Professor Bashir over at UNH multiple times about the importance of collecting data and how, at least in the police or in the law enforcement side of things, it's a real mixed bag with being able to really have this sort of useful information to be able to figure out what's going on. What's it like with the court system when it comes to these sorts of things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You're absolutely 100% right. If you don't have data, you can't really understand, what it is you're doing. And so part of the steering committee we've divided into separate subcommittees to focus on different aspects. So there's a specific subcommittee focused on data collection and data analysis. And we actually have a contract with the National Center for State Courts. It's an organization, as its name indicates, that works with courts across the country, helping them to develop exactly these kind of tools to analyze, what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so we do have a grant to work with them, and they're helping us. And so we're in the early stages of that in terms of looking at our own internal case management system and determining what data is there. If we're not collecting data, how do we begin doing that in a way that will allow us to meaningfully come to some conclusions about what's happening?
I mean, is your prediction that the data exists in some way, or is it going to be something that's going to be primarily we're going to start at a date once this evaluation is complete and then really be able to figure out what needs to be done?
So I don't really know the answer to that
Yeah.
quite yet, but I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think some of that data does exist, and some of that data will need to, figure out a way to start collecting it. So I think it's, like you said, it's a little bit of both.
So another thing that I think is super important when we're throwing around terms like equity and implicit bias and things like that. Depending on the conversation you have, it differs wildly what those necessarily mean. And I make no bones about it with my political leanings and cultural debates that are going on in society, but I feel like the law system, legal system, is especially one of those instances where these sorts of things are really important to take into consideration. As you brought up earlier on in the conversation, is people at all walks of life, income levels, points in their life, age, disability, will at some point hit the legal system. Whether it's they need to get a form filled out because a family member passed away, whether it's they're getting a divorce, whether they enter the criminal justice system. These sorts of things are very important to consider in various different ways. So let's start off when you refer to equity in the legal system, what does that mean?
Well, I think we are focused on ensuring impartial justice is delivered. And so I think that's really what the focus here is, which is that there are not barriers to access to justice. So, you mentioned disability, physical disabilities, for example. So if you come into court and we, have a number of people that have physical disabilities, hearing impairments, and so forth, that those people are not disadvantaged. For example, those individuals are not disadvantaged over someone who comes into court with different abilities. And so we need to examine to make sure that we're providing justice equally on that footing. I mean, it's same in terms of cultural issues. If someone comes to court and their English is not their first language, we need to make sure that we have the ability to be able to that they're able to be understood, and they're able to understand us. And so making sure that all occurs in a way that we can deliver impartial justice is really the core of our mission. It's our constitutional mandate, and it's part of our self-examination here.
And I mean, people need to also like the knee-jerk reaction when you hear for some people, like my audience are a lot of right-wing people listen to the show. I think are wrong when you start freaking out about these sorts of things, because I mean you figure the gravity of the sort of things that people will encounter when they enter the legal system. Usually, in many instances, it's not in their greatest day. It may be there are many things going on in their life, especially when you're talking to the criminal justice system. It's a big reason why I've been a huge supporter of the bail reform efforts that the ACLU and AFP New Hampshire have been involved in. Like for people that maybe want an example, what are some instances where you feel like, just anecdotally, people, it's important to have these sorts of things considered?
Well, I mean, I think language and disability are two obvious, easy examples, and we've talked about those some. And I guess I'd like to just sort of, if you sort of step back at this for a minute, I think
Mhm.
these concerns about people being treated based on, their merit as an individual, as a human being who comes to court, and that they are, the value of their case and the merits of their dispute are treated based on that kind of basic human dignity and respect. Those date back to the very founding of our country. I mean, I was sort of thinking about this conversation that we were about to have today, and I'm thinking about the roots of our Constitution. I mean, it goes all the way back to George Washington. One of his gripes about the British was that he felt he was treated as a second-class citizen because he was an officer in the colonial army and could not get a commission as a full member of the British military establishment. And that was one of his, gripes, that he was treated as a second-class citizen. And a lot of people back then felt that. And, it was those kind of inequities, those kind of treating people because of their class and where, they sort of what their background is, as opposed to who they are as individuals, and judging them on their own merit as human beings and as individuals who come to court. That's what our job is. And that's what we need to self-examine. And I think, we just have to look at what's happening in the world to recognize that we're not perfect. We're humans. And if we don't take a good hard look at what we're doing, then we don't know if we're doing a good job or a bad job. Hopefully this analysis will show us that we're doing, by and large, a good thing here in New Hampshire, but we can't know that without asking the questions.
Yeah, it seems, in my personal experience, it seems like the court system, and especially New Hampshire, is very collegial. They try and work together. They talk, they try and improve. I've seen many conversations with judges over at the law school, especially with just trying to figure out ways to make sure people are treated fairly and things move in the correct direction for the best of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just give you another example, sort of a more sort of real world example that we have here. Obviously, we have lots of people from various backgrounds come to court, and sometimes it's hard to pronounce someone's name. I mean, I struggle with the French names that I'm here in Manchester, and um, but if you don't make an effort and you make a jest of how someone's name is because it doesn't look sort of common to you, that makes someone feel like they're a lesser person because you're not sort of treating them as an individual. And I think, being able to understand that and understand how your reaction to the individual who stands before you, how you're reacting to them and how they perceive that reaction, I think are really important. And learning about that and being better able to communicate with the people who appear and use the court is critical the to everyone feeling that they're getting justice when they come here to the New Hampshire courts.
Yeah, it seems like technology is really, it seems like a great time to try and especially consider a lot of these things and have an initiative with technology kind of blowing up through coming out of COVID-19, where there's so many new tools that were available because like there's stuff out there to help with name pronunciations and figuring it out ahead of time, to have your files be done digitally so you're able to collect the data that's going to be required. And like people maybe not don't know, like there's all sorts of database systems that court systems and legal offices use that talk to each other and able to make sure the right files are in the right format, so people who maybe have a different language are able to get things in a different language, as opposed to just hoping that there's a translator there that day at the courthouse for your specific language. Especially when you're talking Concord and Manchester, where there's so many immigrants of different populations from around the world. Like there's big Indian population here in Concord, especially, and things like that.
Yeah, and those are obviously important constituents, but there are people, and I think this cuts across all nationalities and backgrounds, that may not have access to some of the technologies that are necessary to access the courts. For example, we do a lot of electronic filing now in cases, and so if you have a civil lawsuit in court and you don't have access to a computer, we need to be able to make sure that that lack of high-speed digital, high-speed internet connection, or lack of even of a readily accessible computer doesn't prevent somebody who doesn't have the economic means to be able to pursue their case or answer a case if they're on the defending side of things, that they are still able to have equal access to courts. And so, that's just another example of how what we're doing may have negative impacts on a certain segment of the population who uses our court system.
So, in the last 4 minutes here, a lot of people aren't familiar with what a superior court is. So I think that'd be super helpful for people that they've probably heard about civil court, generally speaking, or criminal court. Hey, I got a speeding ticket. I got to go speak to a judge. What is a superior court?
Sure, great question. So Superior Court is we call it the Court of General Jurisdiction. So it means we truly do everything with some very minor exceptions. So we don't do any kind of probate, wills, trusts, and estates work. We do not do family law cases, and we do not traditionally do juvenile cases. Now we touch on all of those areas, but really those are primarily handled by the specialty courts that are in the circuit court and circuit division. So beyond that, though, I say we hear cases from as relatively minor as a speeding case all the way up to a first-degree murder case. I tried one last week, in fact, in this court, and everything from a typical slip and fall to a multi-million-dollar medical malpractice or other, toxic tort case. I mean, it is truly covers the gamut of the type of cases you might need to resolve, or where people need to come to court to resolve their disputes. So we are truly, and we are the only court of jury trial jurisdiction. So we do all the jury trials in the state in Superior Court.
So you've been at this court since 2011, so a good long time. I mean, what sort of changes have you seen over that span of time? Sorts of cases or different things. I'm assuming a lot.
Yeah, no, there's been so many. I mean, just, talking about the technology, that has been an enormous change. So when I started, it was all paper files, and now we are virtually all electronic files. I mean, there are very, very few paper files left. That's made a huge difference, and we made that transition before the pandemic. I don't know where we would have been during the pandemic if we had not been in that kind of electronic filing world. It really allowed the job that we do day in, day out to continue, for people to be able to continue to access courts. We added to that the opportunity for video hearings, so that if people, because of COVID, couldn't come into court, but now even for people who may have disabilities, who can't travel, they can make arrangements to appear by video here in court. We can see them. We can have an exchange for, a litigant who is here physically. They can be able to see the individual on the screen, and vice versa. And so those kind of technology changes have just opened the access to justice. I mean, a lot of changes over the years.
So 30 seconds. What's your favorite kind of case to cover as a judge?
Oh, wow. That's what I love about this job, is truly the breadth of the work. And I don't mean to say that without being specific, because that's what drew me to this job. So I wanted to be a Superior Court judge because it's one of the last areas in the law where you're truly a general practitioner. We deal with everything from land use cases to serious criminal cases to complicated restraining orders. I have neighbors who can't get along because of a barking dog, to very complex contract disputes. And that variety is what makes the day interesting every single day.
New Hampshire Superior Court Justice Willam Delker, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
TheNewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show. Be sure to subscribe to @NewEnglandTake on YouTube. All our interviews and segments are posted there as YouTube videos. Subscribe and like and the whole 9 yards. You know what to do if you're on YouTube. I'm your host, AJ Kirsa. This has been The New England Take.